When I was younger, I went on a school trip to a well-known camp. My elementary school organized the excursion, and though the prospect of camping excited many of my classmates, I wasn't exactly thrilled. I didn't have many friends and ended up being assigned to a cabin with kids I barely knew. It was summertime in Georgia, the days were hot and sticky with humidity, while the night surprised us with an unexpected chill. Most of our days were spent outdoors, engaging in typical camp activities like canoeing, roasting s'mores over crackling fires, and hiking through the thick woods. One evening, the camp offered an optional night hike. To my surprise, my cabin group was the only one interested. The other kids in my group convinced me to join, though part of me hesitated. A couple of teachers accompanied us as we ventured out into the dark woods, flashlights in hand and nervous excitement bubbling through our group. As we trudged deeper into the forest, our shoes crunching against dry leaves and the occasional twig, one of the teachers mentioned something, a comment meant to add a thrill to our hike but instead filling me with unease. "Did you know this area used to be a burial ground for slaves?" she said casually. "Those flat stones you've been stepping on? They're not random rocks. They're headstones." The words sent a shiver down my spine. We were just kids, and while I'd always had a morbid curiosity for scary stories, hearing this was too much for me to handle. I wasn't the only one who felt uneasy. Several of the girls in my group visibly tensed. One of them whispered, "Can we go back now?" The teachers, perhaps regretting their little revelation, explained that turning back would take too long and insisted we keep moving forward. Reluctantly, we pressed on, though the light-hearted mood from earlier had all but vanished. When we finally returned to our cabin, relief washed over us. But the tension lingered. Some of the girls were still visibly shaken, whispering about what the teacher had said and the eerie silence of the woods. A few of them asked if we could share bunks or at least leave the lights on. The teachers, however, dismissed the idea, citing camp rules about safety and lights-out policies. As the cabin settled into uneasy quiet, I climbed into my assigned bunk, a top one, positioned on the far wall of the room. The lights were turned off, and the teachers left, their footsteps fading as they walked down the path outside. Minutes passed. I lay awake, staring into the dark, trying to calm my overactive imagination. But then, a piercing scream shattered the silence. My eyes flew open, and I bolted upright, looking toward the source of the noise. That's when I saw it. Standing in the far corner of the room was a figure, tall, impossibly tall, its shadowy form nearly reaching the ceiling. Its eyes glowed an unsettling fiery red-orange, like burning embers in the pitch-black room. The figure seemed to be wearing a hat, though its edges blended unnaturally into the shadow surrounding it. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. The other girls started screaming, their voices overlapping in panic and fear. Some were crying, others whispering prayers under their breath. It was clear we were all seeing the same thing. Moments later, the teachers burst into the room, their flashlights sweeping across our terrified faces. The first girl who screamed bolted out of her bed, her sobs shaking her entire body as she tried to explain to the teachers what she'd seen. Her description matched what the rest of us had witnessed, a tall, dark figure with glowing eyes. The teachers exchanged concerned glances but tried to calm us down, assuring us it was just our imaginations playing tricks on us. They ushered us out of the cabin, insisting they'd investigate. We waited outside in a huddled, shivering group as the teachers thoroughly searched the cabin. They found nothing, no shadow, no unusual objects, no signs of anyone or anything that could have caused what we saw. The girl who had screamed first refused to return to the cabin. She was so distraught that the camp had to call her parents to come and pick her up that very night. The rest of us, still shaken, were eventually coaxed back inside. The lights were turned off again, and the room fell silent. But something was different. The corner where we'd seen the figure was empty now, bathed in an odd, almost unnatural brightness that seemed out of place in the darkened cabin. It was as if nothing had ever been there, as if the figure had never existed at all. Even now, years later, I remember that night vividly. The other girls and I still talk about it occasionally. None of us have ever been able to explain what we saw, but one thing remains certain: whatever it was real, and it changed the way I see the world forever. After that night, something shifted within me. I couldn't look at the world in the same way. The logical part of me wanted to dismiss what had happened as a trick of the mind, a group hallucination brought on by fear and suggestion. But deep down, I knew better. That figure was no figment of imagination. It was something else, something darker. The camp counselors did their best to sweep the incident under the rug. By the next morning, they acted as though nothing unusual had occurred. We were herded into the dining hall for breakfast, our usual routines resuming as if the events of the previous night were just a bad dream. But the girls from my cabin and I knew better. We exchanged uneasy glances, the unspoken memory of the shadow figure lingering between us. One of the girls, a quiet and shy girl named Sarah, refused to talk about what happened. She sat at the edge of the table, poking at her scrambled eggs, her face pale and drawn. I tried to strike up a conversation, but she just shook her head, her lips pressed tightly together. It was clear she wanted to forget. I couldn't blame her. Later that day, we were sent out on another hike, this time in broad daylight. The teachers assured us this trail was safer and far from the burial grounds. Despite their assurances, I found myself scanning the woods constantly, my eyes darting to every shadow and movement. The towering pine trees, once majestic, now seemed ominous, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands. Halfway through the hike, I lagged behind the group. My legs felt heavy, and my mind was consumed with the memory of those glowing eyes. As I paused to catch my breath, I heard it, a faint whisper, barely audible over the rustling leaves. At first, I thought it was one of the other kids playing a prank, but when I turned around, there was no one there. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaky. The whispering stopped. For a moment, all I could hear was the distant chatter of my group ahead and the rhythmic chirping of cicadas. Then, just as I was about to brush it off as my imagination, I felt it, a cold, sharp sensation grazing the back of my neck, like icy fingers. I spun around, my heart pounding. Again, nothing. But the feeling didn't leave me. It clung to me like a shadow, an invisible presence that refused to let go. I hurried to catch up with the group, my every step filled with unease. That night, back at the cabin, I struggled to fall asleep. The other girls seemed to have moved on, their laughter filling the room as they shared stories and jokes. I envied their ability to forget. My bunk felt suffocating, the darkness pressing down on me like a heavy blanket. Just as I was beginning to drift off, I heard it again, the whispering. This time, it was clearer, the words faint but unmistakable: "You shouldn't have come here." I froze, my body paralyzed with fear. The voice was low and gravelly, completely unlike anyone I knew. Slowly, I turned my head toward the corner of the room. It was empty, but the air felt charged, heavy with an unseen weight. "Who's there?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. The room was silent, save for the soft snores of my cabin mates. I clutched my blanket tightly, my eyes locked on the corner until exhaustion finally claimed me. The next morning, I woke up feeling drained, as if I hadn't slept at all. The other girls were already up, chatting excitedly about the day's activities. I wanted to tell them about the voice, but something held me back. A part of me feared they wouldn't believe me, that they'd dismiss it as a lingering effect of the previous night's scare. As the day went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Whether I was in the dining hall, on the playground, or even in the bathroom, I felt a pair of unseen eyes following my every move. It wasn't until our afternoon arts and crafts session that I finally confided in someone. "Hey, Emma," I whispered to the girl sitting next to me. Emma was one of the braver kids in our cabin, always quick to crack a joke or stand up to the teachers. If anyone would believe me, it was her. "What's up?" she asked, glancing up from her lopsided clay bowl. I hesitated, my fingers nervously twisting a piece of yarn. Have you felt anything weird since last night? Like someone's watching you?" Emma frowned, setting down her bowl. "What do you mean?" I lowered my voice, leaning closer. "I heard something last night. A voice. It said we shouldn't have come here." Her eyes widened, but she quickly masked her surprise with a nervous laugh. "You're just freaked out. That's all." "Maybe," I said, though I didn't believe it. The look in her eyes told me she didn't either. The last night at camp was meant to be a celebration. We gathered around a massive bonfire, the flames licking high into the dark sky. The counselors handed out marshmallows and told cheesy ghost stories, their attempts at humor falling flat for me. I couldn't stop replaying the voice in my head, its warning echoing like a dark mantra, "You shouldn't have come here." I sat near the edge of the group, my back to the woods, unable to shake the sensation that something was out there, watching. Even the laughter and chatter of my classmates couldn't drown out the oppressive silence pressing in from the trees. It felt alive, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. "You okay?" Emma's voice jolted me from my thoughts. She plopped down beside me, offering me a half-burnt marshmallow on a stick. I forced a weak smile. "Yeah, just tired." "You're a terrible liar," she said, her tone light but her eyes serious. "Is this about the voice?" I hesitated, then nodded. "It's not just the voice. It's everything. The figure, the whispers, the way this place feels. Like it's angry we're here." Emma's smile faltered. "I didn't want to say anything before, but I've been feeling it, too. It's like something's wrong. Like we're not welcome." Her admission made my chest tighten. If Emma, the bravest of us all, was scared, then my fears weren't just in my head. I glanced toward the woods, the shadows between the trees shifting as the firelight flickered. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Emma shrugged, her expression grim. "I guess we just survived the night." When the bonfire ended, we returned to our cabin one last time. The other girls seemed oblivious, laughing and joking as they got ready for bed. But Emma and I exchanged uneasy glances, our shared fear unspoken but understood. The teachers came in to check on us, reminding us to stay in our bunks and not wander around after lights out. As they left, I felt a pang of envy for their calm. They didn't know. They hadn't seen. The lights went out, plunging the cabin into darkness. I lay in my bunk, staring at the ceiling, every nerve in my body on edge. The room was silent except for the occasional rustle of blankets and the soft snores of the others. I closed my eyes, willing myself to sleep, but the moment I did, the whispers returned. "You shouldn't have come here." I sat bolt upright, my heart hammering. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, echoing around the room. I glanced at Emma's bunk. She was awake, her wide eyes meeting mine in the dim light. And then we saw it. The figure was back, standing in the same corner as before. Its eyes burned brighter than ever, the fiery red-orange piercing through the darkness. But this time, it moved. Slowly, deliberately, it stepped forward. The room seemed to freeze, the air thick and suffocating. Around me, the other girls began to stir, their frightened whispers blending with the growing chorus of the figure's voice. "You don't belong here. Emma grabbed my hand, her grip tight and trembling. "We have to get out of here," she hissed. I nodded, my mind racing. But as we swung our legs over the side of our bunks, the figure stopped. It turned its head, as if it were looking directly at us. A low growl filled the room, vibrating through the floorboards and into my bones. "Run," Emma whispered, and we bolted. We didn't stop until we were outside, the cool night air hitting us like a wave. The teachers, startled by the commotion, rushed toward us, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. "What happened?" one of them asked, their voice laced with concern. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. How could I explain what we'd seen? How could I make them understand? Emma stepped in, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "There's something in the cabin. Something wrong." The teachers exchanged uneasy glances but didn't press us further. They allowed us to stay in the main lodge for the rest of the night, away from the cabin and whatever lurked within it. The next morning, we packed our things and left the camp. As the bus pulled away, I glanced back at the cabins, their wooden frames bathed in the golden light of dawn. The figure was gone, but the feeling lingered. That oppressive weight, that sense of being watched, it stayed with me, even as the camp disappeared from view. Years later, I still think about that night. About the figure, the whispers, the warnings. I don't know what it was or why it chose to reveal itself to us, but one thing is certain: some places are not meant to be disturbed. And some shadows are better left unseen.